Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Has this ever happened to you? You're trying to put your children to bed, or you rush them out the door in the morning, and then they decide that that's the best time, the perfect time, to stump you with a question about the faith. Stephen Hemler joins us with short answers to life's biggest questions. Stephen is the author of The Busy Parent's Guide to the Catholic Faith, Short Answers to Big Questions, president of the Catholic Apologetics Institute of North America, author of 3 other books, including The Reality of God. Stephen, great to speak with you. How are you?
Good. I'm glad to be with you, Marcus.
I'm very glad to be able to connect with you. And as we talk about this book, I want to... Obviously, this book comes from a place of very personal reflection. Children tend to be the best philosophers, and they love asking the hardest questions at sometimes the weirdest of times.
They do, yes. Especially as they get older, they'll be dwelling on these questions, and then all of a sudden get the gumption to ask you that sort of thing. So, it is an interesting situation.
Now, beginning there, then, what's your personal story for why you penned? What was the inspiration for the penning of this book in this way?
Well, it's kind of a long story. In my 20s, I would go on business trips, and as I was exploring these questions, how do we know God exists? The Bible, Jesus, what's the purpose of life? These big questions in life. I started writing up one-page summaries of these, answers that I came up with, and I called them my life's little learnings. And then we lived in Saudi Arabia. It's a long story. We were there for 13 years, really enjoyed it. We had CCD there and confirmation and a priest. And this is in Aramco, Saudi Aramco, the oil company. And they wanted their students to go off to boarding school in the 9th grade. And so they wanted something to equip these students for challenges to their faith and morals that they would experience at such a young age. So I took those life's little learnings and put them into PowerPoint with video, interviews and things, and called it Faith Challenges. And then I'd long felt called to, serve God full time. And so when I was 55, I took early retirement as soon as I could from Aramco, and we moved back to Virginia, which is where we're from. And so we started the Catholic Apologetics Institute of North America. And since that time, we've done over 600 apologetics multimedia presentations in over 20 dioceses worldwide, and over 30,000 people spoke to. And then when I was getting started with Cana, Catholic Distance University, and they're now called Catholic International University, they approached me about, doing some online apologetic seminars, 3-week-long online seminars. And so I developed those using, again, the PowerPoint. It went from the Life's Little Learnings to the PowerPoint with speaker notes to these lectures. And so these lectures, when I was done with the first one, compelling evidence of God's existence, I had a whole stack of them printed out, and I said, well, shoot, I could make that a book. Never intended to ever write a book. God has amazing ways of prodding us along. And so I developed the first book, The Reality of God, The Layman's Guide to Scientific Evidence for the Creator, based on that seminar. And then they wanted more seminars, so that led to 2 more books, Search No More, the Keys to Truth and Happiness, and Catholic Stories of Faith and Hope, How God Brings Good Out of Suffering. They're all published by TAN. Well, I still had these Life's Little Learnings, the one-page summaries, and several people suggested that we really need to have something for parents, that this, instead of just, Life's Little Learnings, make it a book for parents. And so that's what we did. Scepter Publishers picked it up, Mike Aquilina, and so these big questions we all address, they're short, one at the most 2 typewritten pages. And so parents are very busy, and the questions are very specific. and unique, so you don't have to sit and read the book from one end to the other. You just go to the questions, about God and creation, Jesus, the suffering, salvation, the Catholic Church, and then life and sex. And so those are the various topics. And so that's how it came about. God just had this plan, seems like, from the very beginning, and here we are.
Well, I'm really glad you shared that story, because numerous parents are listening to this thinking, you know what, I would love to be more equipped to be able to dialogue with my children, my younger siblings, or perhaps even my grandchildren on these topics. So
Right.
Your book is a distillation of a lot of the talks that you've been giving across dioceses across the world. How do you propose people use this book?
Okay, well, there's a couple ways. One is to just, questions come up, as a parent, read it, or as a grandparent, like you mentioned, or anybody, any family member or friend, and read about that question and then discuss it with their child. Most of these questions are for teenagers and older, and we find that 80% of people who leave the Catholic Church do so before they are, I think, 20 years old, 23, and almost half of the people who were raised Catholic no longer call themselves Catholic. So it's a major problem, and most of them leave because they stop believing what the Church teaches, and they may not even have ever even known, much of what the Church teaches, and so. Only 40% of teenagers believe in God with absolute certainty, surveys show. So it's important to be able to answer these questions as they come up. But the other thing you could do is also give the book to your child, especially the older children, teenagers, and college students. And if they have a question, refer them to a specific chapter, or just let them read the chapters that are of interest to them. This book does have, I need to mention this, the imprimatur, the approval of the Bishop Burbidge, Michael Burbidge, of our Catholic Diocese of Arlington, Virginia. So the content is theologically sound. It was reviewed extensively, and parents can be assured that the answers presented are good, solid, correct answers.
Well, I'm really glad for that. And so what I want to do is to go through some rather big picture questions, chief among which is the existence of God. I think many of our listeners right now would be able to attest to the fact that many people in their families, children, grandchildren, have left the faith and frankly are attesting themselves to be nuns. So let's begin there. The fact that the existence of God, or at least God as existence, is a knowable truth.
It absolutely is. And in this book, and then of course in my first book, the scientific evidence of God's existence is presented, and as well as the human evidence. There's evidence within human nature, and a lot of people think all this is pretty compelling, but most people today go with science. Young people, if science says something, then they tend to take it seriously. And what I call the rest of the story is the scientific evidence of God's existence in three areas. The first is the Big Bang. We've heard about that. But then what are the implications of that? And then there's the laws of nature and the fine-tuning. And if I could go through those briefly. So the Big Bang is when the universe came into existence about 14 billion years ago. It's when space, time, matter, and energy were all created. And most people don't know that this was initially proposed by a Belgian Catholic priest, Father George Lemaitre, in 1927, based on Einstein's general theory of relativity. And this was confirmed by Edwin Hubble, the Hubble telescope fame, in 1929, that the universe is expanding. And so if you rewind the clock, it all comes back to a single point in time. And
let's pause there, Stephen. The music is hitting, but we'll pick up on the other side of the break. I'm talking with Stephen Hemler, president of the Catholic Apologetics Institute of North America, and he is also the author of The Busy Parent's Guide to the Catholic Faith. It's a question and answer format for any parent, or any person really, to pick up and start dialoguing the fundamental truths of the Catholic faith. Continuing on the other side, stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Beat. I'm talking with Stephen Hemler, president of the Catholic Apologetics Institute of North America, and we have been talking about his new book, The Busy Parent's Guide to the Catholic Faith. I want to present this as an option to everyone listening right now. This is a really easy read, but you don't have to read it cover to cover. You can go topic by topic as questions are asked of you so that you and your child, your friend, your grandchild might be able to dialogue these fundamental truths of the faith. Stephen, we got cut off by the break. I want to invite you to keep speaking to the very logical fact that we can understand by reason that God really does exist.
Yes, especially science. And I was talking about the Big Bang, the scientific discovery that our universe had a beginning. That was a surprising discovery in last century cosmology. And, of course, nothing comes from nothing. And if everything came from nothing, then this is, a lot of people think, pretty compelling evidence of a transcendent creator outside space and time who ignited that Big Bang. And you would think, after a violent beginning and explosion like the Big Bang, that the universe would behave in a random, chaotic, and unpredictable manner. When I talk to students, I always ask you, when you play with firecrackers, does it make things a mess, or do you get order and harmony? Well, it makes a mess. But our universe is surprisingly well-ordered and predictable. The seasons come, the seasons go. The sun rises, the sun sets. They're all governed by the laws of physics. These mathematical expressions of the laws of nature that explain the order, harmony, and regularity that we see in the universe. E equals mc squared is the most famous one. And so the second of the evidence of God's existence that we talk about are these laws of nature. And a big question comes up. Did Einstein, Isaac Newton, F equals ma, these scientists, did they create these laws of nature? Or did they merely figure out a mathematical expression for a pre-existing law of nature that's out there? Well, they didn't create them at all. So if they didn't create them, they just figured out how to express it mathematically. Where did these laws come from? And why is there a mathematical foundation to the universe, E equals mc squared? And where did that come from? And why is it understandable by human intelligence? So it seems that these laws of nature that are intelligible, we can understand them since they were created by an intelligence. These mathematical laws of nature that take the greatest efforts of the finest human minds to unlock must have come from mind, capital M, far greater, and that would be God. And so this is what did it for me in high school when I realized about these laws of nature, these mathematically elegant laws of nature. How I could conclude that God exists. Well, about 50 years ago, scientists made another discovery that points to evidence of God's existence, and that's called the fine-tuning of the universe. In these laws of nature, there are many constants. C is the speed of light. And these numbers, there's about 20 of them, in the mathematical expressions of the laws of nature, they're all set to precisely what is needed for life to exist, for us to be here. If any one of them was just a little bit different, we wouldn't be here. And so it's like there's dials on a wall that have all been set finely tuned for us to be here. And so if there's fine-tuning in the universe, science has discovered, then that's some pretty compelling evidence of a fine-tuner that set all those dials just right. And Sir Fred Hoyle, who was initially an atheist, but British Cambridge University astrophysics and mathematician, he's the one who came up with that name, Big Bang. He just dismissed it. It's just a Big Bang. But he came around with this fine-tuning. He said a common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. And so there is some pretty compelling evidence. It's what I call the rest of the story. They're not going to get it in school, students, and they're certainly not going to get it in TV. So it's important to be able to, and our presentation on this, by the way, if you go to our website, cainaweb.org, CAINAWEB.org, if you go there, this presentation is filmed and available for viewing, along with our other ones. Another presentation that young people really like is the one on the medical studies of near-death experiences and how they show pretty conclusively that we have a soul and that our soul survives bodily death, and and we're destined for either heaven or hell. There is an afterlife. So there are a lot of reasons to believe that we talk about in the book and in our presentations.
Now, from there, I want to repackage the conversation, or at least move the conversation along to the question from desire, because you've presented us a lot of very systematic ways of thinking about the universe, but there's also the reality that there are desires within us, as C.S. Lewis talks about in Mere Christianity, that aren't fully fulfilled on this side of the veil.
Right.
How does that speak to the existence of God?
Yeah, that's very important as well. These human desires, we desire perfect knowledge and perfect love, but we don't have either of those in our world. So how do we know what they're like? We seem to have this innate awareness of and desire for perfect knowledge and perfect love within our consciousness. It's part of our conscious self. And so it makes no sense for us to seek that which is unattainable. We only seek that which is attainable, if not here, then in the hereafter. That God is the source of our conscious desire for perfect truth and perfect love. And what we're seeking is God, who is the perfect truth and perfect love. And you mentioned C.S. Lewis, and he said that creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. He says a baby feels hunger, well, there is such a thing as food. He said, if I find in myself a desire which no explanation in this world can satisfy, there's actually 5 of them, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Mm-hmm. So many people believe that this is compelling evidence of God's existence within also our conscience. We have this voice in our head that's trying to get us to do right and avoid wrong. And do we have to follow our conscience? No, we have free will. So why did God give us this conscience that is not necessary to follow? Why do we know this right from wrong? It seems that we are to use our free will to do what is right and avoid what is wrong. And even though we're guided by our conscience, we are free to do otherwise and often do. So why do we have a conscience, and where does it come from, especially if it's not totally effective at getting us to do right? And C.S. Lewis, in his book Mere Christianity, as I'm sure you know, he goes into this famous explanation of our conscience, what he calls a moral law in our hearts, points to God's existence. And so that's compelling evidence within human nature as well. It points to a creator, as he said, who is intensely interested in right conduct, in fair play, unselfishness, courage, good faith, honesty, and truthfulness. And it shows that God not only created the universe, but through our conscience, he's taken an interest in each and every one of us, and he cares about our personal moral choices. So all this we sum up in the book. We call it the 3 C's as evidence of God's existence. The first is the cosmos, the universe, the Big Bang, the laws of nature, and the fine-tuning we were talking about. Second is our consciousness and these desires. We seek perfect love, perfect truth, and also our conscience, the cosmos, consciousness, and conscience. So these are pretty compelling evidence, many people believe, I certainly believe, of God's existence.
You did not shy away from touching on the brilliance of St. Thomas Aquinas, who himself endeavored to use reason to demonstrate knowing the existence of God. Tell us about that.
That's interesting. Yes, it is very important, and he calls it actually proofs of God's existence. And we do talk about, this in the book that as evidence of God's existence. But I find today that most young people, philosophy doesn't seem to sway them very much, and it seems like science, and we're talking about within human nature, that has more of a sway. But we do summarize Aquinas's 5 ways, he calls them. The first mover, or argument from motion, and these are all a little bit esoteric, but we did summarize them in a way that people can understand them. First cause, or argument from cause, supreme order, intelligence, or argument from governance of the world. That's where science can come in as well. And so these are 3 of those 5 ways that are mentioned in the book.
Now, we can go on and on about different arguments for not just God, but the reality of the Genesis story. But I want to step back into the bigger picture conversation, which is when you read through the entirety of the book, it's very clear that they all present one clear picture, that the Catholic Church does in fact contain the fullness of truth. And so boldly proclaiming it means being unafraid of questions.
Absolutely. And that's why we feel it's so important to equip, teachers, educators, catechists will appreciate this book, confirmation class teachers and that sort of thing. So it's not just for parents. It's for parents, grandparents, as you mentioned, godparents, other family members, certainly educators, teachers, and catechists. And so to be able to answer these questions is, I think, very important in helping our young people stay in the faith, that many times they are not finding answers that they find satisfactory. So again, these answers are help to keep them in the faith.
Now, rounding this out, we were going to have all of your contact information available in the description of today's program. But Stephen, thank you very much, not just for penning this book, but also for making the time to speak with us about it.
Well, it's been a pleasure being with you, Marcos, and I'm glad you had a good time on the Good News Cruise. A deacon friend of mine gave Bryant, your assistant, a copy of the book, and I'm glad you picked it up.
Oh, well, we were glad to receive it. My guest has been Stephen Hemler, president of the Catholic Apologetics Institute of North America. We've been talking about his new book. It's called The Busy Parent's Guide to the Catholic Faith. It's a very easy read, and if your child has any question about the faith, just go to that chapter, see the answers, and engage it boldly with your child because the church has the answers. I'm Marcus Peter.